What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily. So last week, alongside the product red iPhone, Apple also made a change to their iPad lineup. This is Apple's new iPad, and I use the term new pretty loosely here. This particular iPad is just called iPad, and it's technically the 5th generation of the standard 9.7-inch variant, not including the iPad Airs. I'll go over all of the ins and outs of this device, of course, but right off the bat, the main selling point for this thing is its price. At just $329, this is the cheapest any 9.7-inch iPad has ever been at launch. And if you don't have one yet, or are currently using something a bit outdated, now might be an excellent time to not only upgrade, but to do so without having to pay an arm and a leg. So let's check out what $329 gets you. As far as the unboxing experience goes, there's really not too much to see here, but I've never been one to skip out on an unboxing. Underneath the iPad, we're greeted by the familiar designed by Apple in California packet and paperwork. Also included are the standard lightning cable, as well as the large 12-watt power adapter to charge the larger iPad battery. And underneath the last bit of plastic wrap, we have the very familiar 9.7-inch iPad, which I chose to get in that nice gold color. For $329, you get 32 gigabytes of storage and have the choice between silver, space gray, and gold. And if you do need extra storage, Apple does offer a 128 gigabyte model for $100 more. In the iPad lineup, this device fits in between the iPad mini and iPad Pros, and it seems to take the place of the iPad Air, at least for now. It's obviously cheaper than the iPad Air was, and offers less features than the iPad Pro 9.7-inch, and I'll go over all those differences in just a minute. As far as hardware is concerned, there's really nothing unexpected here. You get that 1.2 megapixel FaceTime camera around front, which, yes, is quite a bit outdated at this point. On the back, you'll find the 8 megapixel f2.4 aperture shooter, which is great and all, but please don't take pictures with your iPad in public. As far as buttons go, the volume and power buttons are in the same place as always, and down at the bottom are dual speakers and the lightning port in between them. Now, this 5th generation iPad is actually housed in the original, thicker iPad Air casing, and is back being about 0.29 inches thick instead of 0.24 inches like the Air 2. Not a huge deal, not something most people would even notice, but it is worth mentioning, as Apple is essentially recycling their parts, similar to what they did with the iPhone SE. One of the most important aspects of this iPad is how it performs, and I think this is where it really shines. It scored 2548 and 4440 on Geekbench 4, which is only about 10% slower than the 9.7-inch iPad Pro, something I was really surprised to see. Inside, you get an updated A9 processor and M9 coprocessor with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Those specs are more than enough to handle anything from games to side-by-side multitasking and even editing and exporting 4K video through the iMovie app, which is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, to keep the cost of this iPad relatively low, Apple did have to cut some corners as far as build quality and features are concerned, which are certainly noticeable and might be a deal breaker for some. The first is Touch ID. While we've had the much faster 2nd generation Touch ID sensor since the iPhone 6S, it hasn't made its way to the iPad. Touch ID is still good, don't get me wrong, but if you've been rocking any of the most recent iPhones or the new MacBook, for example, you're going to notice it's quite a bit slower than you're probably used to and not necessarily as accurate. Again, not a huge deal, but something at least worth noting. The other cost-cutting measure has to do with the screen, and I think this is the most unfortunate part of this iPad. While the 9.7-inch display definitely looks pretty good, it's even supposed to be brighter than the iPad Airs, the screen itself is the non-laminated 2-piece glass and digitizer setup. What that means is that there's a noticeable gap between the front glass and LCD digitizer. So around the edges, you'll see sort of a black shadow where it's obvious that they don't meet. And when touching on the screen, you'll definitely notice how your finger doesn't really feel like it's touching directly on the display. It looks and feels sort of like you're touching above it. There's also much less reflective coating on this screen compared to the iPad Air 2, so in bright light and outdoor settings, visibility and glare might be an issue. However, with all that being said, it's still a 9.7-inch Retina display with a 2048 by 1536 resolution at 264 pixels per inch, and generally speaking, it looks really good for the average consumer. One other thing to note though, this iPad will not work with the Apple Pencil, so if you're hoping to use it in that regard, you'll have to get one of the Pro models instead. All in all, even with the cost-saving measures Apple took, I still think this is a really great deal at $329. In fact, I honestly think it's the best iPad you can buy when strictly looking at it from a value perspective. It's basically an iPad SE, like the iPhone SE. It's familiar hardware with upgraded internals, and for people who have been holding out on upgrading their much older iPads, or for people who have been reluctant to buy an iPad at all, I think this is a great option overall. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you think of the new iPad in the comments below. Also, be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.